Hi everyone, Susan Storm here, and I'm joined today by Denzel Mensa, and we are continuing our series on the cognitive function stack, specifically the 8-function stack by John Beebe. So if you don't know who I am, I'm the founder of the website psychologyjunkie.com, where I've written hundreds of articles about personality type. I've also written several books about the different types. And Denzel, can you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Denzel Mensa. I'm an ENFJ 911, social sexual for those of you who are familiar with Enneagram. I'm also a certified life coach and personal development coach, relationship coach. And yeah, I really just enjoy getting to know people. I enjoy philosophizing and exploring all different types of like concepts and really understanding the world in different ways. So yeah, I think that's a gist.
Awesome. Thank you, Denzel. So today we're continuing our series. We have talked about all the functions in the primary function stack. So dominant function, auxiliary function, tertiary, and inferior. And if you are new to type and you're not sure what all the cognitive functions are, I would definitely encourage you to check out our other live streams to get started, because today we're beginning our series on the shadow functions. And so if you're brand new to type, jumping right in with a discussion about the opposing role might be a little overwhelming and confusing because you don't have that other information already stored in your mind. If you want to join us anyway, feel free. We love to have you here. And if you are joining, I want to say thanks for making the time for us, and say hi in the comments because we'd love to interact with you. The way these live streams works is that I will do a presentation about the particular function alongside Denzel. And if you have questions as we're going, feel free to just drop them in the chat or the comments if you're watching this after it's streamed, and we'll try to answer those as much as we can. We'd love to hear from you and be able to help in your understanding of type. So today we're going to talk about the 5th function in your cognitive function stack, the opposing role. So if your dominant function is extroverted thinking, then your 5th function would be introverted thinking, and it's that way across the board. So no matter what if you just take your dominant function and then change the attitude of it, that's what your 5th function will look like. So for me as an INTJ, my dominant function is introverted intuition. My opposing role function would be extroverted intuition. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slides for today. And again, if you have a question, just let us know, because we want to make sure that you are included in this. All right, so we're jumping past a lot of preliminary stuff because we've been going through this series for quite a while now. So again, if there's a question, feel free to leave it, but there also are other streams, if you look on our live streams tab, about what the other functions are here. So this is an example of a function stack. This is the ESFP cognitive function stack. And as you can see, these are the 4 primary functions: dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior. And then if you look lower, you get to the unconscious functions. So what that means is the functions in your primary stack, those are the ones you associate with yourself. You tend to see them, use them, and know you're using them. You're conscious of the fact that you're using them. You're conscious of the fact that you value them, and you can tap into those. They're basically what you see as part of yourself. The unconscious functions, they seem other. They seem a little bit like when you use them, you wouldn't necessarily be conscious of the fact that you're using them. And so they're parts of yourself that maybe other people can see, but that you don't necessarily see. And because of that, we tend to project them onto the others, the archetypal energy of those functions onto other people. And if that sounds confusing, just stay with us and hopefully it'll make more sense as we go along. Now, what we're talking about today is John Beebe's model of the function. So his model, its appearance is a little different. So he has what's called, instead of a dominant, he calls it the hero. And this is the same personality type, ESFP, but don't worry, we're going to be talking about all 16 types. So instead of dominant, he calls the dominant function the hero, and the inferior the animus. And that would make up the spine of your personality type. And the spine is essentially the how yourself, like the core of yourself. And then the auxiliary and tertiary functions are called the mother father for auxiliary and eternal child for tertiary. And these placements are more about how you interact with others. Then he has the shadow. So the opposing role is what we're talking about today. And then after that comes the critical parent, or some people call it the witch, and then the trickster and the demon. Now, these sound really woo-woo and a little like creepy and strange. I've been accused of promoting witchcraft before by talking about the shadow functions. This isn't actually anything involving witchcraft or demon. Basically, the whole point is that there's like a sort of energy, and sometimes a negative energy, associated with these functions. It doesn't mean you always use them in a negative way, or that you can't differentiate them in a positive way. It just means that until we become conscious of them, until we become aware of them and try to harness them and differentiate them, they do tend to show up with some negative energies attached. So like all the function placements, the opposing role creates a tension of opposites that creates balance for the personality type. So your dominant and inferior function, that creates a tension of opposites. If you're a dominant sensor, let's say you're an ESTP, then your extroverted sensing is connected to introverted intuition, but they're opposites. But without the introverted intuition inferior, extroverted sensing wouldn't be as powerful. This tension of opposites is very important. So while the opposing role can seem annoying, oppositional, unacceptable, uncouth, or out to get us, it can actually help us to grow. We're at risk of seeing people who use this function as oppositional, because before differentiation, that's how we tend to use it. So if you are, let's say you are a ESTJ and you have oppositional introverted thinking, when you're interacting with introverted thinking types, you might assume that they're being oppositional, just because when you start going to introverted thinking, it's often from an oppositional stance or an argumentative stance. Mark Hunziker, who wrote the book Depth Typology, he's one of my favorite authors on type. He said the opposing personality is like the hero's shadowy would-be usurper sibling, always convinced that he could do a better job of running the kingdom. So if you think of the hero as essentially the king, if you like the Lion King, we'll just call him Mufasa, then the opposing role might be Scar. It might be the type that's like in the background thinking, I could do this way better than the dominant function is doing this right now. How can you identify this function in yourself? Because this one's very difficult to identify in yourself. The fifth function often feels at war with the dominant function. A person doesn't readily identify this function as part of themselves most of the time. It seems other. Usually only other people are likely to see it and identify it in a person until it's differentiated. We may vilify people who have qualities that we push down into our shadow. So anything that we repress into the unconscious, we are more likely to project onto other people. And that's why understanding the shadow functions is so important, because we could be going through our lives making all these projections without necessarily realizing it or owning it, because we don't accept the shadow as necessarily part of ourselves. So it's that part of us that, like, have you ever met somebody who says, oh, I never do this. I never do this thing. And everyone else around them is kind of shaking their heads like, you do that all the time. Sometimes that can be because it's a shadow function projection or a shadow function response. And so they're not conscious of the fact that they do it because they don't want to associate that part of themselves with their idea of me, with their ego. Denzel, any thoughts before I keep going?
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite ways to view the opposing role is essentially the mercenary. And this actually, Antonia Dodge from Personality Hacker actually, Beebe came up with this model, and her and Joel Mark Witt have been getting coaching from Beebe for, I think, a little bit over a year now, if I remember correctly. And so they've been actually like talking to him personally, and then they've been like kind of like teaching a little bit about all of this as well. And Antonia was able to pretty much kind of coin like a synonym for this role that really captured a lot for me that I might talk a little bit more about later. But yeah, I think that the term that I prefer is the mercenary, which is not anything different from like the opposing role. But I think that the biggest way to really like think of the energy of your opposing role function slash mercenary function is kind of like what Susan said. Like I like the whole Mufasa versus Scar thing. It's like, oh, like they want to do the same job because they're covering the same territory. You know, Fe and Fi are both covering the same territory of feeling. You know, Ni and E are both covering the same territory of intuition. However, one is like, I can do this better, and then the other one's like, no, I can do this better. And so they can kind of like clash at times, but also the mercenary is pretty much what the hero calls on when the hero doesn't want to get its hands dirty. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, like, start thinking, for those of you who are watching, like, start thinking of like ways that like, what is my hero function, my dominant function, and then therefore it's my mercenary slash opposing role function, and what are some ways in which my dominant function, it's like, oh, I would never do that, or I would never think that. And that whatever you're thinking that your dominant function is like, oh, I would never do that. I could never do that. I would never go about achieving this goal in this way. Your opposing role slash mercenary functions, like, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. And that's the whole thing about shadows, because it's like the part of us where we don't want to relate to it. You know, I think it's called like ego dystonic, when you are kind of like, oh no, that's not part of me, and you're just kind of like separating yourself from it. That's when it actually is, no, that actually is a part of you. But once you like allow it to come into your psyche, then it's like, okay, there's this side of me. It doesn't fully represent who I am, but it is a part of who I am as a person. And so just like, you know, we relate mostly with our top four functions, but we still, as a human being, also have our last four, and we have a different relationship or different energy with those four. And so today, yeah, that's what we're mainly talking about, that fifth function and how its energy shows up with every type.
Thank you, Denzel. I love those examples and that way of defining it. And yeah, it would be ego dystonic. So another way of our primary functions, you could also just call those ego syntonic, and then shadow functions you could call ego dystonic, if you want to explain them that way. So let's talk about how the opposing role can show up in projections. I have some quotes here by people who've talked about projections and the shadow. Mark Hunziker says, the opposing personality comes into play in our lives most often through projections, the archetypal assumptions we make about other people. Dario Nardi said, we project unto others what we repress or neglect in ourselves. And again, Mark Hunziker says, this is a shadow that is very hard to see in oneself. It seems to fall in the blind spot of the superior function and very easy to project onto another person, especially a person of the opposite sex. So if you're wondering, okay, what exactly is a projection? Because the word that's thrown around a lot, but I feel like it's good to define just before we move forward. So a projection is something that you don't associate with yourself, so you're placing it on something outside of you. So if you, the way this can show up in the opposing role is, say you're repressing, so you're an ESFP and you're repressing introverted sensing. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't want to be tied down by all these routines, or I don't want to be tied down by rules from the past and things like that. That's not how you want to be. You might be around someone who is a SJ type, who does value introverted sensing, and you might project, wow, this is a bad example. That's what I do for like on the spot. My INTJness doesn't do but see, you might become oppositional with introverted sensing. So when your extroverted sensing wears out and introverted sensing kind of, it degrades into introverted sensing, you might start telling people like, you need to do things the way they've always been done, or you need to like make a plan, or you need to like have the specific routine. This can happen. We'll go into a little bit about this further on. So when someone's coming to you and they have an SJ preferences, so a preference for introverted sensing, you might project that they're being oppositional with you because that's how you use introverted sensing, even if they're not being oppositional with you. And I'm going to pass it to Denzel because I feel like I kind of screwed up there.
No, I think that was
spontaneity is my strong point.
It's all good. I think that actually, like, you're still nailing it. I actually don't have anything to add on to that. I think that you did a good job.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So when does the opposing role show up? When the ego's performance, the primary functions, are inadequate. the opposing role can show up. It can look like the hero degrades into the oppositional function. The opposing role can challenge the hero, or your dominant function, to see things in a new way, but the dominant often sees its input as uncouth, unacceptable, or needlessly annoying. This function will show up to defend the hero when the hero is threatened or blocked. So I came up with this example. Just like a younger sibling might complain about an older sibling, but then jump to its defense when another person puts that sibling down or hurts them, the opposing role comes to the hero's defense when it is exhausted, obstructed, or incapacitated in some way. It may show up as arguing in defense of the hero. So we all have someone, a lot of times it shows up in families where you're like, I can complain about my sister all I want to, but the minute someone else says something mean about my sister, I'm going to defend them. This is often how the oppositional function can show up, is it's kind of annoyed by the dominant function. The dominant function always thinks it has all the answers to everything. And the oppositional function thinks its way is better. If only it were given the crown, it would be running everything so much better. But the minute someone else obstructs the dominant function, then that's when the oppositional role can come into play and be like, no, you can't do that, and then start using its own tactics to protect the dominant function. And we'll go into some examples of this as we get further on. Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that before we go into examples?
Nope, not yet.
Thank you. So this isn't a function that's talked about as much as the egosyntonic functions, the top 4 functions in your stack. And so it's a little, it's not something that even I'm talking about and demonstrating as much with people. Usually people are primarily interested in their top 4 functions. So I'm excited to actually finally get into this. Let's talk about oppositional introverted intuition. So ENFPs and ENTPs would have oppositional introverted intuition. These are some of the ways that it can show up. It may put off planning because there are too many ideas. It can dislike being serious. It may interpret NJ types as oppositional when they don't intend to be. It can be turned off by excessively reflective, mystical, or supernatural ideas. It dislikes being told how things will turn out, but may occasionally become stubborn and insist how the future will be. And it may view introverted intuition types as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, or too out there. Now, I want to preface all this by saying any type can have a wonderful friendship or relationship with any other type. So if I'm saying, these types might view these other types in a negative way, I'm not saying it's impossible for those 2 types to have a good relationship or a good friendship. But it's a stumbling block that you can be aware of, that there might be a tendency to project these negative things onto someone of this other type. You can certainly move past it, though. So introverted intuition, which is the opposite attitude of extroverted intuition, tends to look for epiphanies, insights, ripple effects in order to understand how something will play out. And so introverted intuition tends to eliminate possibilities till it finds the one most likely possibility, whereas extroverted intuition tends to do the opposite. It generates more possibilities and kind of lives in each of them. It wants to extrapolate more and to hypothesize about alternatives rather than being stuck on necessarily one prediction or one ripple in the pond. And so ENPs can put off settling because they have too many ideas about they want to explore, or they'll decide on one, but then they'll jump to another one and another one, another one. And so they can put off planning, like I said, because there's just too many ideas. And I'm going to hand that over to Denzel. Your thoughts on oppositional introvert intuition?
Yeah, I think that everything that you've listed there is accurate. And I think that another way that this can show up as the mercenary for ENPs is kind of like, I think it was the penultimate one, the penultimate bullet point, where it's like dislikes being told how things will turn out, but may occasionally become stubborn and insist how the future will be. So it's almost like if they realize like, okay, my ME is not working with coming up with like these ideas, or like I'm not really like, getting people excited about, this theory or whatever it might be, then the NI might be like, hey, you want me to take over the job in a way? And it pretty much can like, it the NI does what it needs to do to get its hands dirty. It's like, hey, this is how it's going to happen. Like, this is exactly what's going to happen in that way. And it's insisting that whether you take my ideas or not, like, this is what's going to happen in the future. So you either get on the train or you're going to get left behind. And it's almost like it strikes a sort of like fear, like, oh shoot, like, well, if this is the future that's coming on, then I should just hop on this idea, like, you know, because it's insisting like, hey, like, you're gonna need this eventually. And I think that's one of the main ways that I can say that I've patterned it so far. Again, like when it comes to shadow functions, to be in full transparency, although I understand the archetypal energies of these, I won't have as much examples as I have with the more egosyntonic functions, because this is also still like kind of like I just started learning about this, like these functions, like maybe about like a year ago. So it's something that I'm still also collecting. But yeah, I think that's one example that, you know, could be there. And if there are any NPs or ENPs in the chat, then, and with all the other types too, like make sure to like drop some of your experiences as well. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear from, I know Cody is an ENTP, so I would love to hear any thoughts from him or anyone else who's watching. Yeah, another difference between NI or introverted intuition and extroverted intuition is that extroverted intuition is an extroverted function. So of course it's focused on the external. Its inspirations and ideas are usually generated from some stimulus in the external world. Whereas introverted intuition, the insights and possibilities that it generates usually coming from some kind of inner place, which is why INJs or NJs, even when they want to get like their best insights, often pull away from the external world, whereas NPs, when they're trying to get new ideas and possibilities, will usually need to push themselves into the external world so that they can generate ideas. So the oppositional introverted intuition, the way that ENPs can see it is like, I don't really want to pull away from the external world and just look for these epiphanies within myself. Like, how's that gonna help me? They want to look externally. Let's move on to the oppositional extroverted intuition. So this would be oppositional for INTJs and INFJs. So these types can view hypothesizing and brainstorming as exhausting or pointless. So we often associate brainstorming with intuition, but it's actually more specifically should be associated with extroverted intuition, because introverted intuition tends to do all that possibility finding internally alone, whereas extroverted intuition enjoys bouncing ideas off of people and throwing out alternatives and hypotheses. So, but introverted intuition can find that exhausting, can find it overwhelming, can find it pointless. It can get frustrated by a lack of seriousness. So INJs do want to find that one vision and move forward towards that one thing. So when people are throwing out lots of possibilities, they can feel like, this isn't even serious. No one even cares about like the plan, because they're just throwing out one thing and then another thing and another thing. And these aren't even maybe really well thought out. They may dislike random use of what ifs and imagination that detracts from focus. So if an INJ says, I have this idea about X, and then you have an NP in there, it's like, oh, well, here's another way of looking about it. What if we did this or that? The NJ can suddenly become kind of oppositional, or they can see the other person as being oppositional, because they're like, why are you trying to detract from my one introverted intuitive vision? You're getting in the way. Like, shut up and listen to me, kind of thing. It dislikes being told about multiple interpretations to their insight, but may give multiple interpretations stubbornly when their introverted intuition is obstructed or belittled. So say you've got an INFJ or INTJ, and they're like, I really think that in 5 years, this is what's going to happen in my country. And then you have other people throwing out multiple ideas like, no, it could be this, or it could be that, or no, that's not going to happen. And then as they're trying to explain it, they lose their marbles. Like they can't hold on to their argument very well because they're getting overwhelmed. Then extroverted intuition in an oppositional capacity may come in and be like, well, have you thought of this or that other thing that basically completely dismantles your argument? And so that's how it can show up in an oppositional way to protect their introverted intuitive hero. INJs may also view NE types, so extroverted intuitives, ENPs, as flaky, oppositional, needlessly difficult, or as having a hidden agenda. Again, this doesn't mean that INJs and ENPs can't get along, because they absolutely can. But this is something to look out for, is this projection of an oppositional, needlessly difficult energy that the other person isn't actually bringing to the table. An ENP who's giving alternatives and ideas and hypotheses to an INJ might be doing it out of a genuine desire to help. But if the INJ is interpreting that as oppositional, as getting in the way, as being needlessly difficult, then there's going to be an argument there that wouldn't need to happen. So the whole point, one of the most important things about type is understanding this so that you can avoid getting into these pointless arguments and discussion, these bickering fights that people get into all the time that end relationships, that end friendships. You don't actually have to have them if you can become more conscious of the way you're projecting negative energy onto people where it wasn't there in the first place. Any thoughts? I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Denzel. Any thoughts that you have?
Yeah, it's funny. You used the example that I was going to give, again, with the penultimate bullet point. This happens a lot with INJs, where in order to protect their introverted intuition, that is maybe like, being not even really necessarily attacked, but opposed, then they'll bring out their extroverted intuition to almost like refute other people's likes, like just exactly like how you say, like, well, have you thought about this, or how about this, or how about that? And like they're just, and another thing, like an INTJ friend of mine actually told me that she sees herself sometimes do this at times, like when maybe she's getting like a little bit defensive about her introverted intuition, like, well, and here's another argument, or here's another thing, like just to kind of like throw in there and almost like confuse things in order to like allow their NI to like hide away again. So I feel like that is definitely a very big part of how that mercenary or opposing role function can show up.
Thank you, Denzel. Yeah, I've definitely seen this with INJs myself too. And actually another example, so the shadow, that kind of negative hypothesizing can also be turned inward and as well. One example I heard of this from Richard Owen, who's a Jungian analyst, is he said that it could be like you're standing on the roof of a building and you're thinking, I could jump off here. Like, I could totally do that. And you start multiplying all these crazy negative possibilities that you could do in this really strange way. And it doesn't feel like in your egosyntonic or primary functions, when you start doing things but playing with them, there's kind of a positive energy that you're getting from it a lot of the time. But when it's in the shadow, it creates a certain amount of anxiety, or it just doesn't feel, something about it doesn't feel right. Like, why am I imagining jumping off this building? Or why am I imagining driving my car off this bridge and me and my whole family dying right now? Now, some of that can be like an OCD thing too. I know I've heard that that's also a symptom of that. But you can turn the same kind of hypothesizing of all these possibilities, it can be turned inward against the hero inside yourself as well. So even if you're an INJ and you have this vision, you're like, I think in 5 years, this is what my country is going to look like. Your inner oppositional extroverted intuition could be a little kind of voice in the background, like, but have you thought of this? Or have you thought of that? Or have you thought of that? And your NI hero is usually going to, stifle that. No, like, shut up, extroverted intuition. You're always getting in the way, little brother. Like, let me take the reins. So when we do that inside ourselves, we also tend to do that outside ourselves. Hopefully I explained that well. All right. So then we're moving on to oppositional introverted sensing. So ESTPs and ESFPs have oppositional introverted sensing. It can look like putting off settling down or securing for the future because they see it as boring or pointless. It can look at like rebelling against cultural norms. It may excitedly start projects, but get annoyed and frustrated when perfecting the fine details and finishing the projects. May find rehashing past experiences or re-experiencing the same thing dull. Dislikes being lectured about how things were in the past, but may use this as an argument when feeling obstructed or opposed. may view SI types, so SJ types, as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, annoying, or banal. So ESPs have extroverted sensing, which is all about living in the moment and reacting to things as they happen. It's very action oriented, it's very flexible, and is constantly changing based on the needs of the environment, whatever is happening in the environment. Introverted sensing is more focused on creating a sense of stability based on what's worked in the past. And so extroverted sensing types, ESPs, tend to avoid doing that because it gets in the way of constantly adapting to whatever might happen in the moment. And so again, they may just always be in flux. For one thing, they might not really settle down. They might not really get all their ducks in a row because they're too busy reacting to ever-changing circumstances and feeling like, what's the point of that? I don't need to do that because I want to be open for anything and ready for anything. And they may really rebel against rules and age-old wisdom from the past if it gets in the way of their extroverted sensing. So the extroverted sensing hero is like, I've got this. I'm the one in charge here. I know what to do, which is to be ever present to whatever might happen, whatever life might throw my way, be ready to jump into action, experience anything that could be good for me. And introverted sensing as the oppositional function is like, well, maybe you should, I don't know, work on your taxes this month so you're not doing it at the last minute. Or maybe you should, build up a savings account or settle down and pick a place you want to live or things like that. And extroverted sensing hero sees that as oppositional, annoying, boring. Why is it getting in the way of the, what's fun and what's good for me? Denzel, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen this patterned out yet. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just like, yeah, I don't have any like actual examples, but I definitely can say that I do know that ESP types are very much like against like what EPs usually are in general, but usually you can see at least with ENPs because they have the introverted sensing as an inferior function that they can have like some sort of like respect for history and some of the SI things like because it becomes an aspirational function. Whereas like with a lot of like ESP types, it's like yawn, like they don't even really like care for it at all. They're just really like focused on what's happening right now. And like, yeah, kind of like what you said there, like they really do see it as like needlessly difficult, annoying, and like banal. So that's definitely like even right now, like as I've been reading, it's like, yep, that makes a lot of sense. But I haven't seen any ways in which the SI has been used to almost like accomplish an SE task of some sort, like in a like oppositional type of way. Like, okay, like the SE has to now call on the SI to be able to get the mission done, or them both trying to like tackle the same task so far. So yeah, again, if there's anyone in the chats, I would love to hear like a lot of these examples.
Yeah, so I've seen this actually a few times. One of the ways that it can show, I'll just give one example from my own life. So there was an ESTP that I knew who was religious, okay, and really a flexible, fun, not like a dogmatic person. And he was trying to train up a child who was being difficult. And he kept using extroverted sensing, like, no, you need to do this, because it makes sense right now. And the child was being more and more and more difficult. And then he's like, okay, so let me tell you about the way I was raised and how it worked. Now, the way I was raised is the right way. And started giving examples of like, when I was a kid, I would never have gotten away with this behavior. And when I was a kid, this is the way it was done. And started pulling from all the past experiences to explain why this child needed to get in line and stop opposing the SE. And a lot of times that's what's happening, is the dominant function of the person is just getting exhausted, and it's being disrespected, belittled, obstructed in some way, argued against. Not always in a negative way, sometimes negative, sometimes positive, but whatever the case, the hero is getting annoyed. The hero function is just getting pissed off, and then the opposing role is like, okay, let me take the wheel here finally, because you don't know how to handle this situation, hero. You need to go take a break. So with the ESTP or an ESFP, it might look like, okay, settle down. Let me tell you how it was when I was a kid. And that might be how it shows up.
That's good.
For someone who doesn't normally say, here's how it was when I was a kid.
Right. That's a very good example. I'm glad that you said that. I'm keeping an eye out for that now moving forward.
Sometimes it's like, sometimes I think it's easier to see like with parents of children, because parents face opposition a lot, or school teachers, or people who are in positions where they're dealing with people who are going to be maybe a little more difficult than just your everyday person. So then you might see eruptions of that more. We have a comment from Sip. He says, I'm experiencing that now. The introverted sensing I'm experiencing, it's slow and boring. I have two options, one by the seat of my pants and the other building stability and a routine foundation. Yeah, and there's like, if you're at ESP, the natural desire is to go by the seat of your pants, because you don't ever know what the future is going to bring. So why like create all these sturdy routines and create these, big, what's the word I'm looking for? All the stability when something could change and then it's all thrown off. So there's a natural tendency to want to fly by the seat of your pants, because it's the least energy expenditure, because that's what your hero is naturally inclined to do, and it takes the least energy, and it just feels more natural. All right, so then oppositional extroverted sensing. This is what you'll find in ISTJs and ISFJ personality types. Oppositional extroverted sensing dislikes being asked to do something spontaneously and may find impulsive or spontaneous people annoying or disruptive. Often chooses to stick with culturally familiar things rather than trying what's new. Dislikes being lectured about the facts at hand or what action should be taken right away. Yet can become stubborn about the facts, reality, or action to be taken when it's being opposed. May view SE types, so sensing perceivers, as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, uncouth, inappropriate, or disrespectful. So this is another one I've seen a lot. So ISJs really hate having to just fly by the seat of their pants. Like what Sip was saying a minute ago, is he's like, that's the natural thing for ESPs, but for ISJs, that's not the natural thing at all. They want to have a plan. They want to have a routine. They want to always be ready for what's going to happen. So if they're in a situation where they have to suddenly react to their environment, something they didn't expect, it'll really throw them off. And if someone is causing that to happen, they will give that person the biggest glare that person ever received. Like, you do not want to do that to an ISJ. And so if an ISJ is with an ESP, let's just imagine this scenario, and the ESP is like, hey, I know we were thinking of going to the movies tonight, but actually, let's go to a karaoke bar. Hey, come up here and sing with me. Like, the ISJ is going to hate that ESP in that moment, and is going to see them as being needlessly oppositional. This is an extreme example maybe, but that ESP is going to be seen as very oppositional and difficult to the ISJ. Like, why are you doing this to me? And there is a feeling when someone's using the function that is your oppositional role to see that person in a way that's like, why are they doing this to me? It feels intentionally mean, even if it's not intentionally mean. And yeah, so they also, if someone says to an ISJ, hey, you just need to be conscious of what's happening around you. You didn't even see that thing, or you didn't, here's what we need to do to prepare for this spontaneous event. Here's the action that we need to take. ISJs tend to be like, I already know that. I don't know why you're telling me that. Or here's what the plan is, or here's the thing from the past that I'm using in this situation. But if their introverted sensing is being denied, so if they're trying to bring up lessons from the past or details from the past in order to deal with the current situation and it's not working, then eventually they can degrade to their oppositional SE. And that can look like, everyone out of my way. I'm just going to handle this right now in the way that I just see best fit. Like, you guys are all slowing me down. You're all getting in the way. I'm just going to, I don't know, like, immediately, like, physically handle this situation in a very hands-on, actionable way. Any thoughts, Denzel?
Yeah, I've seen this a lot too with ISJs who pretty much they get so fed up with their life and almost like the monotony of it that it's almost like they're like, all right, fine. Yeah, fine. Yeah, look, let me just go do this or let me just go do that. Like, let me just live like a kind of like a reckless life for a moment, or like for a moment. It's not really like for a long time, or like, let me in this moment, like just kind of like act in a way that's like totally out of character and spontaneous in like not even like a quirky way, but just a very like direct way. Sometimes it also comes out with just how direct that they can be in what they say. And it's like a lot more like forceful than what they would like than what others might be expecting or might be used to from them. And then immediately then they just kind of like go back to themselves like, oh my gosh, like that wasn't me, which whenever we're actually acting out of our shadow, then of course afterwards we're like, oh my gosh, that was not me, because it's right back to the ego dystonic place. But once again, yeah, it is you. It's just different side of you that you don't really resonate with as much all the time, but it's still you. So I think that that's one of the ways that I've witnessed ISJs that kind of like come out in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Denzel. There's that's good to know. I'm trying to think. I feel like I have an example on the tip of my tongue, and I can't. So, okay. So I've seen the part of it is I've seen a lot of SJ parents. I'm going to bring a lot of parents into this because I feel like that's a lot of times when the shadow functions end up playing a part. So I've seen a lot of SJ parents with ESP children, and they just tend to always interpret their ESP children as being oppositional. Like, everything they do is defiance to their authority, even if it was not meant that way at all. And so here's an example. A mother is telling the ESP child how to fold clothes. Like, this is how we fold them. We do it this way, step 1, 2, 3, 4. And the ESP is like, but I could just do it like this. This is faster. And the I just, no, this is the way you're supposed to do it. And the ESP is like, but I don't want to do it that way because it's just as good this way. Look, it's not wrinkly. It's perfect. It's fine. And then the ISJ parent who's maybe tired, didn't get enough sleep, is like, oh my gosh, fine. Just do it that way if you want to. Throws all the clothes on the couch, just folds them all really fast and sloppily throws them on the table and storms off. Like,
Yeah.
just get it done. I don't care how you do it. Just do it and get it done.
Yeah.
That might be like an example of, well, just a parent having an outburst, but also oppositional SE.
Yeah. And I think also in that situation, the parent might also like, I could see it as like kind of like showing you like, yeah, sure. Let's just fold it this way, and then when they do it the way the child kind of like was trying to do it, then they do it in a way that's like actually a little bit more intentionally wrinkly and whatnot. And it's like, see, yep, it looks exactly like mine, huh? And it's like, no, not really. So it's like still trying to meet what the SI was trying to do, but now it's doing it in a more impulsive kind of fashion, to like really to still meet that same expectation that it was setting.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it's this impulsive, like, and you were saying forceful, and it's like this impulsive, forceful, physical thing. And then I see another comment from Sip here. He says, I have a friend that is using my alternate choice that I have not made to live my life in, as in a lifestyle, has him flustered and is actually pulled away and is not encouraging my choice. So I guess by alternate choice, like maybe he's using introverted sensing rather than extroverted sensing. And that's and it's not encouraging you to use your extroverted sensing. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that correctly. But yeah, we tend to think that our way of doing it is best, for sure. So if you're an introverted sensing type and you have a friend who's an ESP, you might constantly be trying to remind them, hey, you should like prepare for the future and you should start creating these stable routines and work on having a more predictable lifestyle. And that can be really annoying if you're the ESP, or vice versa. You might, as an ESP, you might be doing that to the ISJ, but in an absolutely different way. All right, so let's look at oppositional introverted feeling. And I'm definitely curious what you're going to think, Denzel, since that's your oppositional function. So hopefully I got this right. May be annoyed by people who disrupt harmony or rapport for their own individual values and feelings. May put off expressing their own individual values and wants if it might disrupt morale. Often chooses to consider the group needs versus their own individual values, wants, and desires. Dislikes being lectured about individual values or causes, but may stubbornly crusade for a particular cause or value. And may view FI types, so feeling perceivers, as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, uncouth, inappropriate, or disruptive. So the way that I've seen this is there's an ESFJ that I know. Again, this is another parent situation. And she has very clear ideas of how people are supposed to act socially. Now, this is a slightly different flavor than what you're going to get with an ENFJ, but it's still, everyone needs to act socially in a specific way. We have these specific manners, these specific customs, bringing introverted sensing into that, and these specific group values that we're all going to honor here. Then you have an introverted feeling grandchild who's like, I don't agree with that. I'm just going to be myself in this situation. And it throws off the whole mood of the whole event, because introverted feeling child might be saying things that oppose the group's values. So let's say the group is really strictly religious, and the introverted feeling grandchild is like, you know what? I think it's totally cool to. I'm a real big, supporter of LGBTQ, but they're a really strict religious family where that's not accepted. Then the EFJ parent could be like, why are you opposing me like this? Why are you you're throwing the whole mood off. Everyone's uncomfortable. You are making things difficult, and you're doing it on purpose. Like, that's often how the ESFJ will interpret it. They're doing it on purpose to make things difficult. Whereas the introverted feeling grandchild in this scenario, like, no, I'm just honoring my own individual values, and I don't agree with what everyone else is thinking. Denzel, any thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, plenty. I think that, so where would I even start? Well, I think first, in short, I'd see like the FI, the introverted feeling, opposing role or mercenary, kind of be like when EFJs are kind of like, again, it's like a little bit of like a sarcasm, like, yeah, you know what, yeah, let's just all be in a bad mood, let's just all, like, whenever we have a bad day, let's just all walk around and just be in a bad mood, because we're valuing our feelings and we're valuing, everything. We're just caring so much about our own feelings and not about everybody else's, and then they kind of like show up in that way, almost again to like prove a point, almost like the ISFJ mother, who's like, yeah, let's just fold it in this way. Obviously it's like being like sloppily like done, because maybe the FI like user might really just like it's not real. They're not really saying like, oh, like everybody should actually be in a bad mood and all of that or whatever, but they're saying like, let's value like that person, that individual's emotions and everything in the room. So then the FE dom could be like, yeah, let's just hold up the whole party right now, and let's just tend to this one person who just wants to have a bad day and make everybody else's day like bad. And is anybody else having a bad day? Like, let's just hold up everything for that person. That's how life should just be, right? Like, every small thing, we should just stop and pay attention to that individual and let them completely hold the party, kind of thing. And like, obviously like there's truth to it, but that's then taken to an extreme to kind of still prove an FE point of like the uselessness at times when we are like, oh, but the individual in this whole thing, it's like, it's not that they don't care about the individual, but in certain contexts, it's like, well, we can't always please everybody. So we have to sometimes sacrifice for the collective, unfortunately. And, that's what it might be. But for me, I think that a personal example of how FI in the opposing role showed up for me, and I'll try to make the story like quick, but I think that it could probably be like a template for like how other people could then start to identify things for themselves, like whatever their role is I remember I went to a an event with actually like personality hacker friends of mine. Like I was at an Airbnb, and I essentially, like, there's a game called Mafia, and I really, really love the game Mafia. It's probably like my number one favorite game to play with friends and everything. And it doesn't it helps that I'm like actually also like really, really good at it. It involves like reading the room and like, deceiving people or actually reading other people and being able to like detect like who's lying and stuff like that. And I remember that I had put in the group chat that I wanted, like, like anybody who wanted to play Mafia, like meet us at like a certain time at the dinner table and we're all going to play. So I did that, and then people were like, "Oh, like I don't really know what it is, whatever, like that." And it's like, I'll explain everything. When it got close to that point, then I reminded everyone, like, okay, like if anybody who wants to play, like, meet me at the dinner table, whatever, like that. And eventually, I did, like, throughout the day, I did kind of like collect people too. So people did start like kind of trickling in. Eventually, it was right before we were all about to have dinner. And ideally, I wanted us to play after dinner, but since dinner was like running late, and I was like, okay, maybe I can get us a game in so that people can understand what the game is. Maybe I'll like hook it in, I'll bait them a little bit, and they'll be like, wow, this game is really fun. I want to play some more, and then it's like, cool, after dinner, we can all play. So we did get a game in and everything. And then I specifically asked everyone, like, okay, show of hands after dinner, because dinner was ready like right after the first round. We got a first round in. And right after that, I was like, okay, before we all go to dinner, like who would want to return to play Mafia again? Like show of hands. And literally about 90% at least of the people like raised their hands and everything. So my FE is like, okay, good. People want to play. It's not just me. People want to play or whatever. But my NI is like telling me like, oh, but they're all going to start eating dinner. They're all going to like split up. And then before you know it, they're going to get lost in conversations, and it's going to be very hard to corral them back in so we can play again. So how am I going to go with this? So pretty much essentially what I thought would happen would happen. But I started going around to the different tables, and I'm like, hey, everyone, just so y'all know, if y'all want to still play Mafia, we are going to be meeting back again at that dinner table in about 15 minutes. So I told like a specific time, and then people were just kind of like, oh, yeah, cool, or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, they're probably not going to show up. And like 15 minutes later and everything, like nobody's really showing up except for like two other people that I was like already with. And like one of them was like, yeah, I don't think the others are coming. And I remember feeling very angry. And in my head, essentially, I'm just like, I never ask for anything. Like, I never have a strong desire for nothing. I always do what everybody else wants to do. The one time that I have a desire, nobody wants to share that desire with me. Nobody wants to do this. And I was like, then I was getting mad at myself for being mad at everybody else for not doing what I wanted them to do. And so I thought it was hilarious because my FI, mercenary or opposing role, showed up, and it kind of was like I did all the FE things, like I was like, hey, do you guys want to play? Boom, boom, boom. Like I set up the group chat, I did all of the appealing things. But at the end of the day, the FI was like, hey, there's another way that we could get everybody to play. And my FE's like, no, I couldn't do that. But the FI is like pretty much was like suggesting that we could literally just tell everyone like, hey, I really want to play this game. And if pretty much like if you care about me, if you're my friend, you guys would play this game because I never get to play it and I never ask for anything. So right now we should play. And that would definitely get the job done because I'm expressing my need, my desire. It's like, I do everything for you guys. I want something for once. But my FE was like, oh no, I just couldn't do that. That's so selfish. And FI is like, that's not selfish. That's getting a need that you want met. And so they both wanted the same thing, but it's like if I were to do it, I didn't do it that day. But the FE would like kind of like turn its head to like not associate with that. Whereas like the FI would then like handle it. And then when if I were to have done it, that would be when I'd come back. I'm like, man, that was so out of character for me. I never get like that. But that's obviously a part of me that maybe even if it doesn't show up often, it's still there. And so I think that's like a really like, personal example of how like that FI mercenary or that opposing role can really show up. And I remember I was talking to an ENFP, and like I was telling this story, Joel Markwitt, actually from like Personality Hacker, and he was like, yeah, and it's so interesting how you saw it as like, oh, that's like selfish and everything. Like he uses FI as an auxiliary function. He's like, because me, like that's pretty much what I would have done. Like, and him and Antonio are pretty much talking about like, yeah, sometimes you just have to like, say it, like, guys, if you really care about me, you're really my friend, I want to play this game, so let's all do this. But my FE wanted everybody else to have their own FI desire to play it. Not for me, but I wanted them to want to do it for themselves. And I think that one of the things I've been learning from FI, like actually an FI friend of mine, is like, sometimes just be okay. It's sickening for me to even say it. Like, just be okay with people wanting to do things, not necessarily because they want to do it intrinsically, but because they want to do it for you. So vocalizing that, and yeah. So hopefully that's a good example that might help people to understand that a little bit more.
That's such a good example, actually. I love that. And, I wish you had actually done it. But I think that's an amazing example. And it actually brought to mind a couple of things. One is that the oppositional function can often show up in a what looks like a passive aggressive way.
Yes.
Like when you're the ISJ and you're throwing the folded clothes down on the couch, you're like, fine, do it your way. It's passive aggressive, right? And when you're like, if you cared about me, you would have played it's passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And so when you catch someone consistently being passive aggressive around one particular function, there's a good chance that it's their opposing role function.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think it's and I've heard that if you cared about me line from EFJs many times before. And this is actually when I used to work more with families, which was actually my favorite way to use type, was with families, and is that, if you had an EFJ wife with a thinking spouse or a FI spouse, if you cared about me, wouldn't you just do this? And it's like, I don't want to tell you what I individually want. I did all the FE stuff to prepare this so that the thing I wanted would happen organically on its own without me having to say, I personally really want this. And the FI types are like, well, why didn't you just say you wanted this?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like, I've had FI users, like I'm married to an FI dom. It was like, well, this upset you, or like, this is what you wanted. And it's like, no, it didn't, because the FE is like, it's the hero, so it views itself as like, I'm altruistic, and no, I would never be like that. But there's still the FI there that's, no, you're like that, because we're one and the same. We just go about it in different directions. And that if you really want the job done well enough, eventually you're going to call on me after you've exhausted all of your resources. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was an amazing example, and thank you for sharing that, because I know sometimes it's hard to share how you use a shadow function, because it doesn't always look like the way it can be vulnerable. Like it's probably vulnerable to even say like, I really wanted everyone to play this game. You know what I mean?
And that I think like that all the time, but then it's like I know that my FE really is like, oh, but we never, not really, like, because it wants to keep its hero view. But it's like, if I'm really being honest with myself, it's like, no, there are things at times that's like, no, we want this. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. I think that's a really great story for anyone who's trying to figure out if that's what it is for them, or working with an EFJ type. All right, I'm hesitant to move on because there's more I want to say about that, but let's move on to the oppositional extroverted feeling, which is what you'll get with ISFPs and INFPs. Oppositional extroverted feeling gets annoyed by people who are especially focused on group values and who chameleon to meet others' needs. People who are like, who can shift their presentation of themselves depending on what's the people they're interacting with. They may resist being responsible for others, and they hate being labeled in the same group with others. They withhold personal data except with a select few, dislike being lectured about group values or what's appropriate, but may stubbornly lecture others about group values or the impact on others when introverted feeling is obstructed. They may view feeling judging types as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, pushy, annoying, or overwhelming. I think Denzel and his wife Jamila are a great example of how, yes, you can have each other's oppositional role, because Denzel's ENFJ and his wife's ISFP, so she would be dominant in his oppositional role and vice versa, and still have a really good relationship. So it doesn't mean that if you are an FJ, all the IFPs out there are going to think you're annoying and overwhelming, but there can be a tendency when you're in your element with extroverted feeling for them to misinterpret it, and vice versa. So the way this can look, I knew someone who in college she was an ENFJ, and she was a social chameleon, and she just got along with everybody and was so warm and so inviting. And there was this IFP in her dorm who was like, "You are so fake. You're just one thing for me. You're one thing for that person. You're one thing for another person. And you're just being so fake. And I don't know why you're doing this to me." And it didn't even have anything to do with the IFP. And so they can interpret extroverted feeling in this negative way sometimes, because extroverted feeling will show different parts of itself to different people depending on the needs of that person. It doesn't mean that they're being fake. They're still showing a real part of themselves, but it's one part to one person, another part to another. It's very flexible. Introverted feeling is not an especially it's not as flexible for others, whereas extroverted feeling is very flexible for others in the moment. And so introverted feeling can look at extroverted feeling and think that it's just being totally fake, totally inauthentic, and even manipulative, because they don't understand why that person isn't consistently this one way around everyone. They hate being labeled with a group of people. Like, don't tell me I'm like that person and that person, or, oh, I'm just like a millennial, or, oh, I'm just like a, this or that. I'm my own person. So being pushed into a group, they really don't like that. And extroverted feeling might like to be like, okay, team, we're a group. We all have the same values. And the introverted feeling type might be like, no, we don't. I don't know what you're talking about. And so an example of this, even from my own life, I have an ISFP child. And there was one day when we were all sitting around as a family, and I had just read this book about being, a generous family. I was like, all right, everyone, we're going to talk about our families. And actually, Daniel was leading the conversation with my husband. He's like, we're going to talk about our family's values and what we stand for as a family, and like what's important to us, And we were talking about good things that I know the ISFP even agreed with. But immediately when it became about the family's values, she was not having any of it. She was like, I don't want to be associated with I'm not the same as all of you. Like, I don't want to be like this way. Like, why do I have to be generous? Are you saying that I'm not already generous? And became very argumentative and difficult to deal with about these group values that we were trying to instill in our family. Here we were envisioning this happy conversation with our kids. We're all like, yay, go team, go. We're going to be an amazing family. And everything was being taken the wrong way, not only by the ISFP, but by other people in the family. And what was happening is the ISFP was being triggered by what they viewed as oppositional extroverted feeling, which is, we're all in this together. We have these group values that we're trying to emulate. And so when someone's trying to stack an introverted feeling type, an IFP type, into a group and say, this is what we all stand for, the IFP is naturally going to want to say, get me out of this circle because you don't know what I stand for. I'm not sure whether I want to align myself with these group values. And I'm definitely suspicious about anything that is a group value. Now, afterwards, we got it all worked out and everything was fine. Actually, we ultimately agreed on a lot of the same values here, but it's just, there's going to be a natural suspicion and an oppositional energy when extroverted feeling feels like it's being pushed on the IFP type. So yeah, that was a lot of information. Hopefully that made sense.
You
Denzel, I
did
want to
great.
hand it over to you.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I think that it is very funny, like how to like to see, I guess again, like that passive aggressiveness can like come out, like again, like I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's a little bit like yeah, sure, let's all just lose ourselves in the group, huh? Like let's just all let's have no identity and just become kumbaya with everyone kind of like thing, when it's like obviously that's not what like FE's actual intentions are. But to the FI dom, like it's almost like straw manning whatever FE is like really trying to like do. But then when it becomes that mercenary or opposing role, they can often be like, you know what? In order to get my FI needs met, let me be friends with these people. Like, let me become friends, because I've noticed that when I'm like really nice to people, and I'm like, almost like how they view the FE dom sometimes is like fake. It's like they actually become like, for them, it's like when they do it, it's almost like how the FE dom can view the FI dom sometimes like selfish, but it's not really always selfish, if ever. Then the FI dom can start actually like channeling the fakeness of the FE, except that with them, the irony is like, when the FE dom is like probably be like using, it's like it actually is like extra selfish, because it's like, I always do this, why aren't you guys doing it for me, whatever. Whereas like for FI, it's like they're actually being fake, because they have they have an agenda, like how they view like FE might be. So it's like, oh, I'm going to be friends with this person. Oh, I'm going to join this church and this community or whatever. And I'm going to do all the niceties and everything, because if I do that, then I'll get these needs met in that way. So maybe it is good to like pretend to be part of the sheep, so that I can get the food that I really want, and then kind of like laugh like suckers, in a way. So that's kind of how I've seen it play out.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think there's a quote in Depth Typology. I think he says that the shadow fights dirty to defend the ego. So your ego being your top 4 functions. So in this case, introverted feeling might fight dirty or extroverted feeling of the IFP type might fight dirty to protect the introverted feeling of the IFP. Because if the IFP isn't getting what they want in a situation, and no matter how much FIing they do, it's not getting what they want, and their other functions aren't helping either, then an extroverted feeling oppositional role might take over and be like, I know how to get you what you want. Let's just go manipulate those people over there. And if you do that, you'll walk away with what you need. And
Exactly.
but the FI might turn away a little bit, like the ego might turn away and be like, I'm going to let's go to sleep now, because I don't want to register that I'm doing this thing. All right, so let's move on then to oppositional introverted thinking. This is what you'll get with ESTJs and ENTJs. So actually, I guess before I get into that, I should explain extroverted thinking, introverted thinking a little bit, just in brief. Extroverted thinking is very focused on objective logic, establishing rules, systems, procedures in order to get things done. In short, there's more to it than that, but that's just in short. Introverted thinking is more concerned with categorizing, naming, defining, and understanding how things work based on these various logical principles. Extroverted thinking tends to take in information makes decisions in order to reach a specific outcome, whereas introverted thinking is more focused on gathering or making decisions in order to understand something better. Like it's more interested in knowledge for knowledge's sake. Whereas extroverted thinking is more interested, give me the logic I need in order to get something accomplished. Again, there's more to it than that, but that's just really, really briefly. So oppositional introverted thinking can get annoyed by people who are theorizing for its own sake or overly focused on clarifying and reworking things. So this can show up like you've got an ETJ who has a job they want to get done, because ETJs always have a job they want to get done. And they have an ITP there and the ETJ says, hey, I need this program to be installed so that we can start tracking all the analytics on our webpage. And the ITP says, well, we could, but let's look at all the components of this program that you figured out. I'm not so sure that this is the best option, because if we look at it this way, we take apart all the various components of this program, it may not be as good as this other program, which has these components, and this other program So let's look at and they're taking it apart and explaining all the components of these different programs that they could use. And the ETJ is like, oh, just stop it and just do the thing I asked you to do, because this is slowing us down. And so they can get very annoyed with people who are slowing down the process by focusing on clarifying information, reworking things, and just like going over the logic to this more nitty-gritty level. Oppositional introverted thinking can resist being in situations that require a lot of focus on detailed troubleshooting or categorizing. So ETJs don't like getting into typically the nitty-gritty of all the logic of how things work. They just want to make it work so they can get the thing done. So an example of this can be an ETJ whose some part of their computer breaks down when they're in the middle of a project. They don't want to sit there and figure out how to troubleshoot the problem for hours. That will drive them crazy. They will pick up their laptop and just throw it across the room because it's just like driving them nuts. Now, they won't all. Some have better tempers than others. But in general, it's going to be really maddening for them. Whereas an ITP type might be like, oh, this is an interesting challenge. Let me go look in forums and figure out how to solve this problem and spend a lot of time on it. ETJs dislike being lectured about nitty-gritty logic, categories, and principles, but can stubbornly defend their principles or their logic when they're obstructed. And they may view thinking perceiving types as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, pedantic, time-wasting, or irritating. So what happens with this is where there's an ETJ will start with extroverted thinking as the hero. And the hero thinks the best way to achieve this specific objective is we need to organize our whole office team in this way. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, done. And then if people are like, no, that's not going to work, and oh, there's all these problems with it, and they're just getting obstructed, their extroverted thinking is getting obstructed, then all of a sudden they might passive aggressively use introverted thinking and be like, okay, fine, let's take 5 hours to figure out how we should do it in this way. We don't need to worry about deadlines. Who cares about actually getting anything done? Let's just sit around and take apart this problem. Do you have anything to say? Again, it often comes out in this very passive aggressive way. So again, I'm going to let Denzel speak on that.
Yeah, spot on. I actually had a situation with an ETJ where I don't remember the exact details of the situation. And granted, I'm not a TI dominant, but this was like a TI TE kind of clash. And I was saying like, well, I wouldn't use this word. I think it's more like this, or I was being like, I didn't really see it as pedantic. I just thought that, oh, I remember it now. Like, I think we were talking about which types are more emotional or less emotional or something like that. And then one of the things I said was like, well, I think it depends on like how we describe or how we define emotional. Because the ETJ was saying that, it's not something that's possible to like measure, and there's all of these things. I was like, well, if we define emotional as XYZ, then maybe we can actually like track like the consistency of maybe like how frequently like certain types cry compared to certain types that don't cry, or like how much they feel in this way. And then the ETJ was kind of like, oh yeah, let's define terms. Like she pretty much was trying to point out like how like it doesn't make any sense to really like be like, oh well, if we define it this way, because then we can just do that for everything. Like, oh yeah, if we define it this way, then maybe we can do it this way too. Like, and if we define it that way, then and so she was pretty much trying to point out like we won't get any results if we just keep on saying, how about we define it this way, and how about we define it that way. And it was like, and I'm sure maybe a TI dominant would have been able to better handle that. But I was like thinking, well, that's not the exact point that I meant. But I also understood like how she was seeing it in that way. And it was just like, okay. And I just kind of like let it go. But she was like, yeah, bring up the point of like pedanticism, where it's just like, yeah, no, like, let's just all just define almost like the FE versus FI thing. Yeah, let's just all like pay attention to our individual values. Oh yeah, let's just all like come up with our own definitions of a word, right? And then that way, we can always win an argument that we want to, because we're tweaking it in this defined term or whatever. But then you'll see the ETJ do it themselves at times when they are trying to argue like a lot of times like in court, like, well, actually, and then they'll become pedantic to get the thing that they actually want, the TE result that they're looking for.
Thank you. That's a great example. And I feel bad as a, you're an ENFJ with inferior introverted thinking to have your introverted thinking picked on like that. That's pretty rough.
Yeah, it was rough. She was an Enneagram 8 too, so it was just very and I was like, oh man, I feel dumb.
Yeah. I'm sorry. That sounds really rough because yeah, if my extroverted sensing was picked on like that by somebody who's really good at, well, it does happen sometimes, but it never feels good. Yeah, a lot of like the hypocrisy and passive aggressiveness that we don't associate with ourselves can be, connected to our shadow in some way. So a lot of times we don't see I don't think anyone ever sees themselves as a hypocrite. And most people are like, oh, I'm not passive aggressive, although some people will own it. But a lot of times there's things about ourselves that we're like, oh, I never do that thing. And like I was saying before, and people around us are like, she totally does that thing. Is anyone going to tell her? And that's where, it might be, related to a shadow function where they're like, they don't associate it with themselves and they don't want to at all. And so even if you point it out, that could be a rough discussion unless the person's very open to personal growth, to learning about how to be a better person. Mm-hmm. So it requires a lot of humility to be corrected in that area, because if someone points out what you're doing in your shadow, you're gonna be like, I never did that. I don't do that thing. And they're gonna be like, but you do. No, I don't, and so that could be like, you really have to have a lot of like openness to being wrong about yourself. All right, so let's move on to, this is the last one. This is oppositional extroverted thinking. This is what can show up with INTPs and ISTPs. So we already have a pretty good idea of what introverted thinking is from the last slide, but it's essentially understanding the principles of how something works, an idea, theory, an object, naming, defining, getting the terms right. Extroverted thinking is more focused on organizing things logically to achieve a specific objective for the most part. So oppositional extroverted thinking may get annoyed by people who focus a lot on metrics, mainstream authorities, empirical studies, rules, and regulations. So this can look like an ETJ boss going to an ITP employee and saying, hey, so it looks like the experiment you were running with this particular, program, it's not working. Our metrics show that it's not popular with our users. So we just need to, cancel that and move to something else. And the ITP could be like, but no, like this is really important, even if the metrics don't show that it's popular, even if it's not like there's not really a strong ROI in this project. I really need to figure out like the ins and outs of how this works and make this work. Rules, regulations, standards, those kinds of things can be seen as very oppositional to ITP types. And they can resist, in the same way, they can resist managing others or entering situations that have time constraints. Extrovert thinking is very focused on time, on deadlines, on how much time you have to reach an objective. ITPs do not like that. And someone who's constantly reminding them, hey, look at the clock, we got to be done at this time, they're going to see that as very oppositional and annoying. It dislikes being lectured about organization, productivity, and effectiveness, but can also become stubborn about those same things when it's obstructed. And they may view TJ types as stubborn, oppositional, needlessly difficult, pushy, annoying, or overwhelming. So TP types, ITP types, don't really like being managed. They like to go down their own rabbit holes of figuring out how things work and doing things in their own way. But let's say they're doing that. Let's say their introverted thinking is like, here's the most logical way for me to, understand this system of how something works, like how to code or whatever. And then a coworker is like, I don't think that's the best way. And they're just getting into an argument about it. Then the ITP type might be like, fine, do it because I said so. And I am in charge of you. And so you better do this, and you need to have this installed and you need to replicate this code on your site, and you have 15 minutes to do it. I am starting my timer right now. Like that's how it might look when an ITP goes to oppositional extroverted thinking. And then when an extroverted thinking type is going to an ITP type and like using extroverted thinking, the ITP type might be like, really, you think you can tell me what to do? Like that, they might think that the ETJ type is doing it in an oppositional way, even when they're not. So again, I'm going to hand the mic to Denzel. What do you think?
That was such a great example. Yeah, I think I've actually like witnessed that twice, not like on me, but like I've seen it like between coworkers, and it's hilarious like to see that happen. But now viewing it through this lens, it's like, oh wow, like yeah, that is like oppositional like TE. I've also seen it come out with ITPs where it's like, again, like yeah, let's just not pay attention to the process of how to get to truth, right? Because we're just always gonna like get whatever result that we want to get, like, and so we don't like, because TE can sometimes be more focused on the results than the actual process to get there. And for TI, it's like, well, let's focus on the actual process and making sure that we perfect the process the best that we can, because if we perfect the process, then we can be sure to have the right result each time. But TE is like, oh, that's going to take so much time. And if we get results and it doesn't work, then we'll just try again in a different way until we get the results. But the TI is like, no, let's use that energy and time to focus on just getting the process right. But then that we don't know how long that time might be, and then a lot less is done after that. So the ITP could like probably just be like, yeah, let's just not pay attention to process, and let's just do it this way so that we can just get the results right, and let's just like abandon whatever it might be. But I think that Tori actually asked a really great question, if you want to like bring that up to kind of like lead this in, where she pretty much saying like, I understand these slides are showing negative aspects, but I find I also embrace my opposing function. Tori's an ENTJ, by the way. Is it possible to like and embrace your opposing function? And the answer is absolutely. Like for me, I actually have as an ENFJ, I actually have a very deep appreciation for FI, both in other people and then now also like in myself, because I am seeing like, oh, that is the side of me that, yes, I have desires and I have needs. And you know what? Like, even though it's uncomfortable for me to like vocalize, hey guys, I know that not everybody wants to do this or whatever, but I want to watch this movie. I want to play this game. I want to do this. And I would like if all of you guys did this for me, even if you don't want to. And it doesn't feel right. But it's something that's like, it's what taps me into like, okay, these are the needs that I have. And you choose your battles, like you find out like, okay, but how big of a need really is this? And will that need, like, the satisfaction of us playing this game outweigh, whatever it might be? Like maybe if I did, for example, actually do that mafia thing, like, guys, I would really like if all of us played it, which is funny, because we went to an event later on, because I did end up telling this story when we were learning about all of the shadow functions and stuff in my personality life path class. And some of the people that were there at the event were like actually on the call, and they were kind of like, oh wow. And so at our last event, an INFJ girl, like, she actually made it her mission to gather everybody to play Mafia. And when we did, like, everyone had an amazing time. Like, it was really fun. Like, we played for like a few hours and everything. Everybody was like really enjoying it. We were all laughing. And I felt like, wow, see, like, it's almost like when the FE Doms like, see, I knew it was best for you, which is, obviously like a kind of toxic thing to say, but it's like, I knew that you guys would like it. And if you just tried what I wanted y'all to do, y'all would love it, kind of thing. So then I guess the question now would come to me, like, asking like, okay, is me acting out of character and actually expressing like, this is what I want, worth the end result that, okay, everybody played it and everybody actually did enjoy it and stuff like that? Or do I foresee it as like, oh, I'm going to still feel so like out of character, icky about it. And so this is actually not worth that. And it is better to just sacrifice that desire because it's not strong enough to overpower like whatever it might be. And I feel like we can think about this for like every, like all of personality types, and think about that for their opposing function, and really tap into and understand like, okay, like, when is the right times to use TI, and actually pay more attention to the process of how this all works instead of just like what the results might be. Like, maybe I should dig more into these different like systems, for example, and like really understand the nitty gritty of all of it instead of just thinking that it's a waste of time. But sometimes it might really just be a waste of time. So like really deciding like what it might be. And yeah, so yeah, just to answer Tori's question, like, yeah, it's absolutely possible to embrace that opposing function.
Thank you, Denzel, and thank you, Tori. That is a good question. And it actually brought up an idea that I had, because I feel like a lot of times when we've been going through these cognitive function placements, we're really struggling to get all the information into the hour and a half that we have. And so I had this idea. I was like, yeah, because as we're going through and we're talking about the opposing role for each type, you can almost see how them differentiating this function and understanding it would be so positive for the person. For example, I mean, Denzel used himself as an example, but I'll just use myself as an example. As an INTJ, I can get so fixated on the one path that I see for the future. Like, this is where we need to go as a family. It's like for my family. And sometimes it can cause you to have tunnel vision, right? And so sometimes integrating some extroverted intuition into my life as an INJ is really important. And going, what if I looked at it in a different way and this other way? Maybe I would see that there's something even better, or I would make peace with the fact that it's not going to my life isn't going to perfectly follow this one ripple effect towards this future vision that I've imagined in my head. So there's a lot of amazing ways that things that can come out of integrating your opposing role. But, just because of time, we're not able to get into all that. So I was thinking, maybe what if next week, instead of moving right on to the critical parent, which is the 6th function, we actually continued this by talking about the benefits of differentiating the opposing role and getting in touch with that, and opening up more time for questions then, and giving each of the shadow functions 2 live streams as opposed to just 1. Because I think, a lot of times the shadow functions, they can show up in these negative ways until we become conscious of them. And a lot of people who are really into type, that are really some of the great people in the type community, have spent a lot of time getting to know themselves. So they are conscious of these things. But, and today we've talked a lot about how these negative ways that it can show up. But I think it'd be great to, continue this next week and talk about some of those positive ways. And then also have a little bit more time for questions and conversation and talking and things like that, and getting involved. So, are you good with that, Denzel?
I am not opposed to it.
You're not opposed to it. See, that makes me think that you're not good with it, though. When people say
no. I meant because we're talking about the opposing function. But I'm totally down with that idea.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm always slow on the wordplay. This happened once, and we were in Disney World, and we were eating at the space restaurant. And my husband Daniel was like, "Okay, what does everyone think of this restaurant?" And Denzel and his wife and Daniel all said something like that was kind of like a pun, a play on words about the food. They're like, "It was not quite out of this world," or things like that. And then it got to me, and I was just like, "I don't know, it's fine." And I totally missed that everyone was doing this theme, and I had messed up the whole video by not continuing the whole play on words. If you had given me like a few more minutes, I would have got it. But as like an introvert, I feel like always my thoughts, like what's happening around me, is on like a conveyor belt, and there's all this other stuff first. And so I'm always slower on the uptake about what's happening around me. Anyways, that's off topic.
I found it cute, Susan. It's cute.
It was something. But anyway, so next week let's talk more about the opposing role, and also, before, we still have a couple minutes. If you have a question before we sign off for tonight, please leave one. I know, Denzel, you might have to get going, so leave a question if you have one. But while you're doing that, Denzel, why don't you tell people how they can contact you if they want a profiling session with you?
Right. Yes. So my name is Denzel Mensa, if y'all know. So if y'all go to denzelmensa.com, then you'll see where you can book me for profiling sessions, which is pretty much I sit down with you for about 60 to 90 minutes, maybe even longer, to not only identify what personality type you are, but make it personal so that you're able to understand, like, oh, this is how I, as an ENTP, relate to ENTP, like with like how each function shows up for me in that way. And then also I do coaching so I can help you to like develop those functions more. So if like your functions are like superpowers and kind of like you're able to like pick up metal, but you're only able to pick up like, I don't know, like microwaves and TVs, I can teach you how to eventually pick up a whole football stadium. And so that's kind of like the type of coaching I like to do. I also like relationship coaching. Relationships is my forte. So like really understanding the thing between the energy, the entities between people and dynamics, and strengthening those, and trying to understand them and dissect them and explain them to people is something that I'm really interested in. So I offer relationship coaching. It could be with, like two people as a couple, but it could also be like, single. And if none of the times work for you on my site, email me at denzelmensa94@gmail.com and just title it like session, and tell me, oh yeah, I'm from India or whatever like that. And, or my hours are up till 5 p.m. and that's usually when yours are done at 5 p.m. Eastern or whatever, like, whatever it might be. And so can we schedule a different time? And we can definitely like make that happen. And lastly, I have a YouTube channel as well. So if you just search Denzel Mensa, then you'll be able to find my YouTube channel over there. I talk about a variety of things, but a lot of them are also typology videos, and I have a playlist for all of my typology videos there. So you can check that out. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you, Denzel. Yeah, if you're not sure on your type, I know I say this every week, but if you're not sure, definitely work with Denzel. He's a really friendly guide. They don't call the ENFJs the mentors for nothing. They're really good at metaphorically, like taking your hand across the screen and kind of guiding you through understanding what your best fit type is and making sure you're happy with it and making sure you understand it. And yeah, if you want coaching too, it's amazing at that. So definitely reach out to him. A link to his website should be in the description for this video. And if you want to know more about the opposing role or about type in general, you can also check out my website at psychologyjunkie.com, where you'll find over 1,000 different articles on type. So I just want to thank everyone who came today. Thank you, Denzel, for being here with me. Thank you, Umesh, Tor, Cody, anyone else who popped on. I really appreciate it. And join us next week as we continue with this function, and we'll get into more of the benefits and the reasons why you should try to integrate this into your life. So thanks so much. I hope you all have a wonderful night. See you next week.